What's good, meaningful movers? Welcome back to Moving with Me, the podcast where actions have meaning, words have meaning, and we open up the conversations to discover what's your next move. I'm your host, Krystal. In today's episode, we are going to hear a tale about finding where you fit in. Ever felt different and questioned what others thought? Maybe you've observed a group of friends and their interactions, thinking, what brought them together? But you know how we do it here. We need to set that theme, so let's go ahead and do that. The word of the day is belonging. This is more than just fitting in, because we can all put on a mask and play the performance. But belonging goes beyond appearances. It's a feeling of being important to a group, and this includes family. That's enough of me talking. How about we introduce our guest, and there's no one better to do that than himself. Zane, why don't you give the people a bit of background about yourself and what you are going to share with us today?
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I am Zane Landin. I currently live in Washington, D.C. I do communications work. I'm super passionate about storytelling and as it relates to mental health, disability rights, and a lot of other social justice movements. I'm always looking to include people, promote diversity. I like that the word of the day is belonging because that is a conversation I had recently about, DEIA. Some people have DEIB as the title to include belonging. And I do think that it's interesting when you think about inclusion. I do think that inclusion should already encompass belonging, but I do understand specifying belonging because it's like belonging is the next step of making you feel valued in an organization or a space or in your family, whatever it is. And inclusion is kind of the baseline, but it needs to move up and move forward to belonging to make sure people are psychologically safe or they feel that they can actually bring up a point without any retaliation or any negative feedback. And so it's a lot of different things, and we can definitely go into belonging because I do think it's a really important term, especially when it comes to this type of work.
Wow. Okay, you just coming right out the gate with some bombs. Like, I've never heard inclusion being referred that way as a baseline. Like, I've never heard it. And as many, I tell you what, I have gone through many different companies and, you have those trainings and it's just never been presented that way. So I'm really super duper excited about this. So I'm going to go ahead and say and throw this out. Zane is a young buck, okay? Like mid-20s. All right? Don't get mad at me about, disclosing your age, baby.
It's okay.
So you started off with like a passion for storytelling and communications, but it didn't start that way. You didn't identify that as a storyteller. So tell me why that didn't come through so much so at the beginning.
Well, I do think that, we all are natural storytellers, and the way we tell our stories is very different. And we always kind of have to figure out what our own narratives are. And growing up, it's hard to say that you're a storyteller. It's what we are. And I think the reason why I thought that way is because I saw stories as the authors, the directors, people making the stuff we see on television or the news. I didn't realize myself that I was a storyteller, and that didn't come out until I found like a passion for writing. Like I'm really passionate about writing. I'm really passionate about what it does and how different it is compared to other forms of expression. I'm not saying it's better because, no form of expression is better. But for me, I'm able to articulate how I feel so much better when I write it down than the way I speak, even though I do love public speaking. But if I have the chance to write something down or to create a narrative or to write a story, I am going to do that. And I think the way you can do that with writing is none other like other forms, in my opinion, of self-expression. You could create any world just from your own imagination, which I think is really fascinating. And so I am the belief that you also should be careful because your mind is so powerful and it can transcend so much that if you write a story or you have a storyline in mind, it is real somewhere. That's how I do. I know it's like such a weird concept, but for me, it is real. Like you created something that didn't exist. And even if it's in your own mind is a universe of different ideas, different things. And so sometimes like be careful of what you're creating because, that stuff is real. But what's funny is I hated writing growing up. I was terrible at writing. I knew a lot of folks that loved writing, loved journaling as a kid. I hated it because I just could not understand it. I didn't get it. It just didn't connect. Especially the way they teach you how to write. It's very systemic, robotic. It's like a specific way you need to write, supporting arguments, have your introduction. And it was like, I'm feeling chained up here. I don't feel creative at all. And so I think that was that. And I even relating it to like the workplace. Like, if there's I read this recently, if there's too many processes in the workplace, you're going to feel less valued in your creativity. Your creativity is going to somewhat, you feel diminished in your creativity because there's too many processes. So if you're teaching people from this idea of there's a lot of processes in writing, how are you going to feel creative when you write? And so I always tried to write from the way that I was being taught rather than how I wanted to express myself.
Mm,
And it wasn't until like middle of high school where I actually discovered poetry. Not that I didn't know that poetry was a thing, but I actually dived into it myself. And I learned that this is my story. This is how I want to write it. If it doesn't make sense to you, I don't care. It's how I want to describe it.
yeah.
Nowadays, like I wanted to have some cohesiveness, but back then it was like, I just want to express myself in the most ridiculous, uproarious way I can possible. And that was where I kind of, I guess, got that self-proclaimed storyteller identity after.
Absolutely. I mean, you know what? To me, writing is like, this is me, this is mine, right? This is my place. This is where I own
Hmm.
my reality. This is where I own who I am. And this is where I find my safe place because it's like, this is where I love me. And then this is my expression of how I love me and how I see myself or how I see my predicament. Like you just said, you're right. You're exactly right. It's so powerful. And that's one of the things that I always say is everyone here, we're all given power, like positive and negative people,
Hmm. Hmm.
good and evil. It's a very daunting feeling to know that we all have the same kind of power. And I love that you brought that up because you're looking at this in a positive context and you're going about this with tons of positivity. Understand that someone with the same negativity fully believes in their word is coming at you with the same amount of power, right? I just love how you really just settled into this. I don't know. I'm just going to stop because I know that there's so much more to this story. But you just, like I said, you're just coming up in here dropping these damn bombs. So I love it. Love it. So you mentioned a little bit about mental health that had started to surface a little bit. Was it in
Hmm.
college where you this surfaced or was it a little bit before that?
No, it was way before that. There probably isn't a time in my life where I didn't struggle with mental health. And that, of course, from the earliest memory of being a young child, I remember just struggling with my emotions, being really sensitive, really angry, really depressed, really anxious, all those feelings. But, I was blessed that, my family was very aware that people have mental health conditions because everyone has mental health, but not necessarily everybody has a mental health condition. I do. And I actually discovered that recently. I just was never diagnosed growing up, but I still had a psychologist from a young age, and mental health runs in my family. So it's a blessing in disguise because, when you have a family that has a lot of mental health struggles and conditions, it does make it harder.
Yep.
But I'm not coming from a place that mental health is only a negative thing. Like, there is a beauty to it. In being diagnosed, there's a beauty of understanding your behavior, but it does still make things harder. But I don't want to demoralize mental health like it has been for centuries. And so I had that support growing up, so that was very nice. And I know a lot of people don't have that, but it wasn't until university that it was the hardest for me. And at that time, I didn't have a psychologist. I felt okay. I felt stable. I felt like I was going through life. Things felt very positive, and then slowly things just kind of started shifting again. Things were changing, which is natural to happen. And so I started seeing myself becoming depressed again, but this time around I didn't do anything about it. I thought I was still doing okay and that I could deal with it myself. I had a psychologist for so long. I know what to do now. I know I have the tools,
Mm-hmm.
but I think at that time I really underestimated how badly you can feel in some of these moments and how sometimes the shadows can really overtake your light. And that's kind of what happened. And so it was a really hard time, especially going into my third year in university. That's where it really emerged in a way I never really thought it really ever could. So I was just engaging in, some unpredictable self-sabotaging behaviors in the mindset that nobody cared about me, isolating myself. I was engaging in self-harm. There was a lot going on at that time, and I took it upon myself. Even though the semester was almost over, I was doing really terribly in all of my classes. And to that point, I had really good grades. Like, school was the utmost important. And so when I saw that my schoolwork was falling behind, that's where I knew I wasn't doing well because school is my number one priority, or it was, I mean. And
Mm-hmm.
so I decided to take the semester off, and I really just stood still and thought about how I could really reevaluate my life. And this is where the storytelling comes in, because the first part was, what exactly needs to change? Like, what do I need to start advocating for myself? And that's storytelling. How do I tell my story? How do I start communicating my actual needs rather than trying to force myself to deal with it when that clearly wasn't working. And so after that semester is where I actually, again, like a new identity, I started seeing myself more as a mental health advocate, because before I wasn't. I was just dealing with my mental health like many people do. I was just going through life with it. Now I was like thinking, I'm here with this new sense that I didn't realize I had before, and how badly I felt. I don't want other people to feel that way. It's never been that severe before. And I just slowly got involved in different organizations. I discovered my voice in the mental health space. I started sharing my story a lot more, and that can start small, because sometimes people ask me, like, how do you share your story? It's a big ask you're asking. It is your story and I don't know how to tell it for you. I think just start with something small. What is one thing that's a defining characteristic? And at the time, it was my mental health experience. And so I could mostly only articulate just kind of how I was feeling. I could not get into the stuff I was doing, the self harm, the suicidal thoughts. I just wasn't there yet. And so when it comes to telling your story, you don't have to start right away. Like, just start slow with some of the things that define you. And so that helped me figure out what my purpose was. And that's always a question too, like, what's your purpose? That's a hard one because it's always changing. And even now, things are changing again, and who knows what's going to happen, because I'm part of this organization, and we talked to a mental health policy person, and they even said that when they advocate, they take themselves out of the equation, which I thought was very interesting, because for me,
Mm,
a lot of the advocacy that I do stems from my experience. And
right.
so they said, to be an effective advocate, not everyone, like, you need people with lived experience, of course.
Yeah.
But they said, if you're an advocate and this is your life's work, but you also have attached your personal story to it, you might get burned out really quickly because of that.
Oh.
Yeah. And I was like, wow, that is actually very profound, because in a lot of mental health spaces, I do love the work, but I see myself becoming detached sometimes from it because it feels very personal. And so if it's connected to something so personal and I'm not seeing changes like I want, I think it's really easy to get burnt out or to lose focus in it. So I'm even really evaluating
Yeah.
how much mental health advocacy capacity I do have because of that reason. I never even thought of it that way. But so things change all the time, and the way you advocate is how you want. If it's you going to protest, I'm not a fan of protesting for myself, but I know how important it is. Some people sign petitions, some people donate money, some people get involved in organizations. I really love getting involved in organizations and offering services like sharing my story or marketing and communication support, because that's what I do professionally. And some of these organizations do need that kind of support, because sometimes they're not communicating their services the best they can, or it's not getting to certain demographics that probably even need the support so much more than who they're actually targeting. So things like that.
Oh my God, you're just nailing it. And I'm just sure a lot of people who are in advocacy, and I know just from my previous podcast interviews, they're coming on podcasts because they're kind of trying to reach others. They'll say, well, I'm reaching my target audience for sure, but they're wanting to go broader than that because it's about awareness now. There's
Mhm.
advocacy and then there's awareness, which goes beyond the folks that are actually impacted by what you're advocating for. This is now awareness to equip those with the knowledge that this is out there, that this exists. These are statistics. These are things to watch out for. Like, I come from a family with mental health issues. I didn't realize until
Mhm.
I researched it that it was hereditary. And
Mhm.
that way, I'm now more informed as well as empowered and equipped with the tools to deal with my children, because I can
Mhm.
recognize that in them as well, versus me trying to be dismissive of it or trying to be in denial of it because I don't want them to have and deal with the same shit I'm dealing with. Yeah, that's a very good one. So you mentioned a diagnosis, that you actually got diagnosed with disorder. Is that right?
Yes.
What was that diagnosis?
It was major depressive disorder.
And what is that for those out there?
Again, I am no psychologist. I don't have my MD. I don't have my degree in psychology. I don't even have my bachelor's in it. But what I do know from my personal experience, it's just a depression that never really goes away. That's just kind of how it works. And sometimes it's more intense than, depression most people experience. People may experience a certain level of depression. Someone who has clinical depression, it may feel a lot more aggravated. Or also, sometimes the depression just is and it comes and goes without any meaning attached to it, which is, I think, some of the hardest things that people have with understanding mental disorders or mental health conditions, because I think that there's this firm belief that we should always be in control of our thoughts and our minds, which we should, but there's a level of we just can't do that sometimes. we can't always be in control of our thoughts, and we know what that's like. I
Mhm.
just wish that would carry over to the broader understanding of mental health, that I may be feeling depressed today and someone asks why, and I just say because I have clinical depression. That might be my why, because sometimes I can't answer, like,
Yeah.
oh, it's a ton of things.
Yeah.
But and if I explain it to you, you may think that's not depressing to you. Okay, not to you, right? But for someone like me, it is depressing, and because of the clinical depression, I'm going to feel it a lot more than you might. And that's not to show that you don't experience depression. It's just a different experience that I have from you, and mine actually has like more of a medical basis to it. It's the same for, someone that has a heart condition. Someone may have certain issues with their heart, just like little things. Again, very different from someone who has an actual heart condition. I think if you can explain it with the physical health, I think people understand it more, because I think there's still a disconnect between physical and mental health, that even though it's the trend to say physical health is just as important as mental health, it's still something that needs to really be spoken about more, because I don't think people understand it. I think that's a way to bridge that gap.
Yeah, 100% agree because we're just hitting the surface level. We've grown a lot from, okay, yeah, and I'm going to go back into my time when I was a child. My mom used to listen to this cassette and go to sleep with this cassette player. And I remember going into a room and seeing it on her ears, and I was waking her up and I said, "What are you listening to while you're sleeping?" And she's like, "Oh, it's like a meditation." I was like, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Maybe you just need to listen to it to understand what it is." And it was just this lady with this ambient music saying like affirmations. You're powerful. You're this, you're that. And apparently it was supposed to be like imbued into your sleep, like, osmosis. And that was mental health at that time. That was what you did for mental health. And so just as much as far we have to go, we have really made a dent into that. And so just folks like you definitely just keep us on the trigger with that. Speaking of triggers, so one of the difficulty pieces that you had was pinpointing various triggers, right? And that
Mhm,
was
mhm.
incredibly frustrating for you. Have you gotten better at that? Or have you basically put work into trying to figure out those triggers, or you kind of accepted, like, you know what, there are going to be some times where I just ain't going to know and I'm not going to like agonize over it because it's going to make me worse?
Yeah, I think there are certain times where I can say that, it's just an off day. It's just a day where I'm feeling depressed. But no, there are definitely times where I can pinpoint those triggers. Would I say it's easier? No.
Mm-hmm.
I think that some people say with time things get easier, or with time things change, especially when it comes to grief. I know some people say, time is the best thing that's going to happen. Well, I get that's kind of like what people say a lot of the times when it comes to this stuff, but I don't really agree. Mostly because it's just not the case for me. And I don't think that's the case for a lot of people. For some people, you never know what issues are going to come out. Like, I've had, issues with like body image for a long time, but, in probably the past year, it's been the worst. And you could say, but you have the tools to deal with it. True, that's actually true, but I still think it's just as hard and even harder because it's unpredictable. And that's the kind of the scary thing about mental health sometimes, is that some of this stuff feels unpredictable and you don't know how hard it's going to hit you. Same with grief. I mean, like when you lose someone and you're going through your day and you're feeling okay and you smell one perfume that reminded you of your grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like there you go. Like that's something that is so unpredictable because you weren't even trying to look for that, and it just kind of came out, and you're very depressed now because
Yep.
now all you can think about is that scent that reminded you of your grandma. And so you can pinpoint it, but sometimes it still is hard though, even with the tools.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned through your evolution and your journey, it
Mhm.
was kind of bumpy in the beginning. So you had some suicidal thoughts. What made you take action and call the hotline?
Yeah, so that was recently because just a lot going on with other things, and also that weekend was my mom's anniversary of her death of 3 years. And so, and it's interesting, like like mentally I felt kind of okay. I felt okay, you know what I mean? But I just was like, I don't know how to explain this, but I did feel okay. Like mentally I felt stable, okay, but I realized I was getting angrier a lot, like responding to certain people, or that I was a lot more anxious than usual. I didn't even recognize those things happening. I even talked to my psychiatrist recently I haven't been able to talk to her, so it's been a while since I brought that up. And she was saying it's a little clear why you were feeling so frustrated or anxious about your body and also missing your mom. It kind of just all came together. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. I really wasn't putting any pieces together, honestly. I just felt kind of, kind of scattered. And so I was very panicky one night, and so, like, super panicky, like more panicky than I've ever been. I don't know if I was having a panic attack. I can't really tell because I don't usually get them, but it was really panicky. And honestly, all this work that I've done, and I'm so aware of all these resources, it's like I should not just sit here and feel this way. Like, let me do something about it this time around. And so I didn't call the hotline. I text them because like I really didn't want to talk. Like I
Yeah,
wasn't. This is why I mean by writing that, in some of these situations I don't want to talk. I have
exactly.
no problem writing. I have no problem texting you because I'm writing. I'm really grateful that they have texting hotlines. And so, yeah, I went with the Trevor Project because I identify as LGBTQ. They are an organization that helps with mental health and LGBTQ people, usually teens. But I'm like, I use it because it's like I'm considered a young adult kind of still. And anyone can reach out though. Yeah, it was an interesting experience, like going through the hotline because I've never experienced it before. It was nice to just kind of chat with someone I don't know, and also that I know that it's completely confidential. They don't know my name. I didn't say my name. I believe they said their first name, and that's it. And I know that these organizations really treat their hotlines really seriously, and that things that are confidential are going to stay confidential. There's a lot of comfort in knowing you're talking to someone that there's no strings attached. You can kind of just talk about whatever you want or what's triggering you, and they're here to give you support. And it actually helped. And even if it was something basic, like, oh, I want you to sit up and I want you to breathe. And every time you breathe, I want you to think these words, or I want you to look at something in your room and focus on that. And I was like, those are like basic things I can do on my own. But when it is guided by someone, it really forces you and it holds you accountable to actually do it. And it's very helpful.
Yeah.
It was pretty helpful. Of course, those feelings don't automatically go away, but I felt so much more calmer after. It was very nice. And the reason why I reached out in the first place, because I was so anxious that I felt like I was going to hurt myself again. I told myself that, I never wanted to be at that place, but it just still happens. And so, when even people will ask, like, oh, you're getting help. Why do you still feel this way? Why do you still feel depressed? Why do you have suicidal thoughts still? I'm like, because it doesn't go away. Like, again, like your physical health, just because you take medication doesn't mean it's not there still. I mean, depending
Mhm.
on certain conditions, yes. And so, again, I'm going to use always the heart condition. You take medication for your heart. What happens when you stop taking the medication? You might
Mhm.
go back to what it was, but why didn't it go away? Because medicine is not magic.
Yeah.
Things do not just go away. Again, certain physical conditions do, and certain mental health conditions can be treated. And you may not need medication. Again, it just depends on the person and how severe their mental health condition is. But for me, that's just not how it works. When I have conversations like these, I always say, internally, I do always worry that suicidal thoughts come. I usually say this too, that the moment I engaged in self harm, that was like it opened up a whole new world, but not a good world.
Hmm.
Because back then, I never imagined engaging in self harm that way. But now that I did, I knew that it was a possibility now. So, again, even if I can go so many years without ever doing it, because it has been years, it's still there. And like I said, I felt so triggered that it just pops in your head. And that's the worst part because it feels so impulsive that you just want to get rid of the image, but it's there, like in the back of your mind. Yeah, it can be scary, but there's so many tools out there, just like it helped me. And so I always hope that people are aware that there are so many organizations, and I hear people, I'm gonna say it's a little of an excuse when people say there's no mental health support for them, it's too expensive. Those are very valid concerns, but a lot of these organizations offer support for free. You
Yeah.
just kind of have to try your best to move forward from that stigma. I know that stigma is powerful. I know a lot of people will say there's no support or it's the money. I think a lot of it does stem from the stigma still because people are still scared to reach out. And even if the resources are all completely free and people are very aware of them, I still think that people would struggle very much with reaching out because of the stigma reason. But those are still valid reasons, definitely. Like, I'm not saying that. Like, mental health is very expensive, ridiculously so. I'm not saying that it's not, but there's still plenty of organizations that offer support for free, and I hope people start, utilizing those free resources.
Yeah. I'm one of those people who struggles with that, and I'm like, I just scared to reach out. I'm not confident to reach out. I'll schedule a session with my therapist before I call the hotline. And they're
Mhm.
very much like, you need to call me immediately. Like, so they make themselves available to me immediately because that's where
Mhm.
my comfort zone is. I've just always, like you said, just been afraid of that stigma. And it's
Mhm.
interesting you mentioned the Trevor Project because I just had a crisis counselor who worked for the Trevor Project on the show.
Oh, that's
So,
amazing.
yeah, and she really was like, hey, look, it is not like that. And then she also mentioned that we do text and everything. So I'm just glad to hear someone who actually has or reach out to the Trevor Project, but also utilize their text messaging and then put that spin on it from a writing perspective. Oh my God, it's so
Mhm.
unbelievable. It's so great. It's so great. So now that we've kind of covered a little bit about your background and just a fantastic story into your challenges and then how you're managing them, or in cases where you're like admitting to yourself where I do struggle, you do advocate though. So what have you been doing? Because I know you said you went to the White House in 2023. How was that?
Oh, I actually didn't mention that. I was like, are you gonna ask about that? Should I
Mm-hmm.
say it? But it
Yeah.
was actually in 2022. So
Oh, 2022.
yeah, it was May of 2022, and that was also the year I graduated. That was that exact month when I went to the White House because it was planned for months. They definitely like were flexible because literally the week that we went was Monday through Wednesday, and I stayed till Thursday, and my graduation was like on Saturday. So I was like, oh, years of being in university or the White House, I really hope I have to choose because like I really don't want to miss a graduation. And so luckily it worked out. It was a really fantastic program that it was actually planned by MTV. So they were the spearheaders. I think it was like their social impact team, a lot of the corporate social responsibility team, whatever. I can't remember the exact team, but they were the ones that spearheaded the effort. And in a way, it was to address mental health, but also youth mental health, because that was really what we were there for, to address youth mental health, because there's a youth mental health crisis. I mean, there's a mental health crisis across the board, but when you look at the rates of young people, it's skyrocketing, and of young
Mm,
people just reporting, and suicide is still like a very leading cause for young people. I think it's second, and so
yes.
it's very much a trend with younger people, and so that is what we were there to do. I was involved in a lot of mental health organizations, and so I saw that they were posting it, and I didn't believe it at first. I was like, this opportunity looks beyond unbelievable. Like, I mean, a connection with MTV. And then they also had several partnerships with mental health organizations like the Trevor Project, like the Jet Foundation. I think Trevor Project, I'm trying to remember, but definitely the Jet Foundation, National Alliance on Mental Illness, the Born This Way Foundation, and a lot of other mental health organizations. And the one thing that I think they did really well was they made sure that they had organizations that specifically were involved in as many demographics as you can think of. And so they had the Asian Mental Health Collective, they had a mental health organization just for Black and brown people, they had one just for trans people, or just for Indigenous people as well. So I like that.
Ooh.
I understand, like, trying to address mental health across the board, and organizations can do that. But we also need organizations and advocates that sometimes specialize. And I'm going to specialize in Indigenous mental health because I think this is a
Yes.
very much community that also needs it. And we also need more Indigenous voices talking about mental health. I'm using Indigenous as an example, but anywhere, like anyone, like even people with disabilities, they're talking about how their mental health has been impacted by their disability, or how people have treated them because of their disability, whatever it is. And I'm really happy they did that. So when I saw that, I was like, the stakes are kind of high for something like this. When I got in, I couldn't really believe it. I think I'm trying to remember, they chose, I think it was 30 young advocates, and it was just a very, very exciting moment. I still can't really believe it to this day. And so I even got to meet the president. If you ever find my social media, you'll find that President Biden took a selfie with the 30 of us, which is quite memorable. Like, I don't know. So
Yeah.
that was one
Yeah.
of the, I think, a pivotal moment in my advocacy. And all the stuff I went through, all the advocacy I did before, it all led up to that. It was very validating.
Oh my gosh. Congratulations on that, brother. Man, that's really good. You also do something with Fellow Through
Mhm.
Inseparable. What is that?
Well, Inseparable is a mental health policy organization. They're relatively new. They just are starting this new fellowship program. And so I can't share too much about it, but we're just learning about mental health policy, and they're doing a lot of good work. They're also coming out with a lot of data on mental health, and they're really pushing efforts, not just from an advocacy space of organizations, but also like changing policy and working with politicians. And that's not always been my forte, but it is incredibly important if you really want to make real mental health change in this country, though.
100%. I love that. Well, let me tell you this, Zane. I'm incredibly proud of you. How do you feel about yourself?
How do I feel about myself? I think the sad thing I will say is, how do I say this? I will say, and I think this can be shared by a lot of people, but I have to remind myself of these things though. I really do. Because I think sometimes we look at people and we see some of the things that they've done and we wonder, how do they feel about that? They have every opportunity. But even with all the stuff I've been able to do, there are so many times where I still feel like I've not done enough. I still don't bring any value. It's such a hard thing. And I know a lot of people feel this way. I don't want to say it's the imposter syndrome thing because I feel like that's a term that's a little overused now. I don't feel like an imposter. Like if I'm in a space, I know I'm there for a reason. I'm here to bring my value. But sometimes I still don't feel confident about myself, or I feel like I haven't done enough, or I feel like I need to do so much more. And I think that's kind of the hard thing when you come from different underrepresented backgrounds. You sometimes think you have to do that anyways, that you have to do triple the work to get equal to someone
Hmm.
else. And so I think that I've kind of internalized that throughout the years. So, but how do I say, it's like I'm still very happy with myself and what I've accomplished. It's just when those depressive thoughts come through, I do have to remind myself and look at what I've accomplished and all the things that I've done. I'm not saying that the things that I've accomplished are the only things that define me, like not at all. But it is still important to the things that I do. And sometimes when you're in social justice spaces and you're seeing things move very slowly, it's nice to see the opportunities that you've had where it's all worth it, because it can feel
Hmm.
very unmotivating because of how slow some things can go. And I know that there are a lot of people that delve in advocacy and they move on because it's a lot of not just like physical work but mental work. I don't blame people if they don't want to be full-on advocates, as long as they're allies and as long as they at least discuss mental health in their life somehow. That's what's important.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that's good. I mean, you're embracing life. That's just what it
Yeah.
is. I really appreciate you just bringing out all those nuances. So, Zane, are you ready to give us your golden nuggets and add that ketchup just to recap?
Yeah, this is why I saved it for the conversation, because I wasn't sure what the takeaway was or the golden nuggets. But I guess for mine, like every single person does bring value. Like literally intrinsically, I think we all bring something to the table. And I think that try your best to recognize it. I'm not telling you to recognize it because I know that's very difficult, but please try your best to do that. And thinking about that, all the stuff that you do and who you are, you deserve a break and you deserve to get mental health support if you need that. So don't ever be scared to reach out or try your best not to feel scared. I know it's really easy to feel that way, but especially these organizations, they will not judge you, and they better not judge you. Like if they do, that's a huge problem. And there are also many organizations out there where you don't have to deal with that if that really is the case. Same with therapists. Sometimes you may not get the best therapist. Just because they're a therapist doesn't mean they're a good therapist. There's something wrong with you looking for someone that aligns more with what your goals are or just what your comfort is. Give yourself a break and treat yourself the way that you treat your friends and your family, which I hope is good. So you should also treat yourself that way too.
Good. I like that. Well, that's the episode today. Do you feel like you are struggling to fit in or don't get a sense you belong? That doesn't stop you from trying, though, does it? Sometimes we have all the components, but we haven't quite grasped the focus. That's why I appreciate Zane sharing his personal story and bringing the phrase dark horse to life. He's found strength and greatness in all of life's greatest hits and lowest lows. I hope Zane's story has found its way to you. If so, drop a supporting comment on your appreciation or offer your own experience. I love it all, and so will someone else. Before I let you go, Zane, why don't you go ahead and remind the people who you are, where they can find your resources, or reach out to you?
Yeah, I try my make myself accessible. So my social media handles are so boring. It's just my name. Just so I make sure if you type in my name, you will get to me, and you will probably find my email, or you could just DM me on Instagram or LinkedIn and chat about anything you want. Always let me know.
Awesome, man. Look, simple is good. What you talking about? I'll make sure to include all of Zane's resources and connections in the episode description, as well as on my website's resources page, movingwithmeaning.com. Make sure you guys subscribe to the show, Moving with Meaning, the podcast, and tap that alert bell so you know when these episodes drop. I am on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and YouTube Music. Please share, like, repost, and follow. Tag someone. We are creating a community. Quick housekeeping before you go. Follow me on Instagram at movingwithmeaning82. Also connect with me on LinkedIn. I do dabble in TikTok at Krystal B. Clark. My YouTube channel is up. Kindly run over there and have a look or two. Links are in the episode. Alrighty. I'm Krystal on Moving with Meaning, the podcast, reminding you to take it one step at a time. All moves have meaning. Check y'all later.